more than a semester of preparations, dozens of students involved to organize one event you are going to be part of in the following hours. Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you on the 15th annual Model Conference organized by the Faculty of International Relations under or at the University of Economics and Business in Bratislava. Despite the challenges regarding coronavirus, we are working hard to provide the best experience for you. And therefore, we have come up with this hybrid format of a Model Conference, taking baby steps and hoping to see you in person the next time in the year 2023. I am proud to announce that this event is organized under auspices of Her Excellency, the President of the Slovak Republic, Ms. Zuzana Čaputovej, and also in support with our sponsors, Lidl Slovak Republic, Guest Cloud, BAT, and also Philip Morris Slovakia. All of this event is going to be covered, or was also covered beforehand by the online magazine Bratislava Deň. Also, big thank you for that. And as you're already going to find out, or you already know, we are going to split today's topics in two sections. First of all, the political sections. The second of all, the environmental section is going to take part in the few hours, or in the following hours, better said. As you already know, we are going to finish at noon, so in order to start right now, I would like to announce our honored guests who would like to open the ceremony or open the conference with their speeches. Well, let's say we are in the hybrid format, so virtually. First of all, Mr. Vice Rector of the University of Economics and Business in Bratislava, Mr. Boris Matoš.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. I'm honored to welcome you at the University of Economics in Bratislava on behalf of our rector, Professor Ferdinand Daňo, at this significant day, which is devoted to the 15th Model Conference. Dear students, your several months of effort and demanding systematic preparation have reached the final stage. The last year of your master studies, you have the opportunity to apply all your skills and knowledge obtained during your time here. This course, which results in this event, offers great opportunities for you, for our students. And maybe I would like to mention at least three of them. Training and negotiation skills, public speaking training, and certainly learning from each other through discussions and talks. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I am proud that this unique project belongs to the portfolio of activities at the Faculty of International Relations. It's a magnificent promotion for the school and the university as well. My sincere gratitude goes to all who made this event possible. I wish you a successful day, enriching experts' contributions and stimulating discussion. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Vice Rector is followed by Mr. Dean of the Faculty of International Relations here in Bratislava. That is Mr. Rudolf Kucharčík.
Dear Excellencies, dear guests, dear colleagues, and of course, our students. Although online, I would like to welcome you at the University of Economics and especially at the Faculty of International Relations of our university. Model Conference has a long-term tradition. The Faculty of International Relations organizes the conferences for the 15th time. The aim of the conference is clear: to discuss urgent challenges of international politics, international economics, and environmental issues, and to be more general, to discuss the current challenges for our and global society. This year's conference has two panels, environmental and political. We will discuss energy security, future of the research, green policy issues, migrations, and demographic questions. Let me thank all our panelists for being with us and for willingness to share their knowledge and attitudes with us. Let me thank also all our partners and especially Her Excellency President of the Slovak Republic Zuzana Čaputová for her support in this untypical time. Model Conference is, we can say, final project of our students. Students, they are going to finish their studies in few weeks. I really appreciate all the effort of them, and I'm grateful they didn't give up and they fulfilled all the tasks connected with the organization of the conference. They prove they are really professionals prepared for their life careers. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, let me thank once more. I really appreciate effort of all my colleagues and conference team leaders. Without their effort, everyday work and patience, we probably wouldn't meet here today. Of course, special thanks to Marcela Spasírova, this year's conference president, and Tomáš Kajanek for their positive attitude. Ladies and gentlemen, have a great time with us. Thank you.
Thanks again to our Mr. Dean of our faculty, and we are going to proceed with two more opening speeches, and one of them is going to be the Mr. Leading Supervisor of the Model Conference, Tomáš Kajanek.
Dear university members, members of the Faculty of International Relations, sponsors and partners, chairs of the sections, supervisors, students and guests. Let me warmly welcome you all to the 15th Model Conference of the Faculty of International Relations. At the beginning of my speech, I would like to thank all the students and partners participating in the preparation of this year's event, which has become an important tradition of our faculty. Dear students, despite the circumstances of the pandemic, I believe that you will enjoy the result of your hard work and that today's conference will leave a significant memory of your master's studies and your alma mater. Dear guests, this year the students of the Faculty of International Relations worked within the environmental and political section and the organizational team. The main subjects of the sections became two current topics of international relations to which students paid increased attention at the end of their studies. Dear members of the organizing team and chairwoman of this year's Model Conference, Ms. Marcela Spasírova, I believe that the organization of an event of this nature has been a valuable experience for you and that you will also use the acquired skills in your future. In this way, I want to appreciate your work in the past 2 semesters in front of a wider audience and wish you all the best in the years to come. At the same time, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the presidents of the environmental and political sections, namely Juraj Sikora and Andrea Poloučíková, and their supervisors, Zuzana Beňová and Jakub Pernický, for their commitment and determination. Dear sponsors and partners, including our faculty and the University of Economics, thank you for proving the willingness and social responsibility thanks to which the students were able to organize the Model Conference of the Faculty of International Relations. Special thanks to Her Excellency, the President of the Slovak Republic, Zuzana Čaputová, who took over the auspices of the event, even though she could not honor us with a personal speech today. Dear speakers, guests, and everyone present, I believe that all of you will enjoy the panel discussions, enrich yourself with the extra knowledge, and spend a pleasant time. Thank you for listening, and now I'm passing the word back to Marcela.
dear colleagues, university members, and supporters of the Model Conference. I am delighted to be welcoming you today as the president at the 15-year jubilee of the Model Conference. We would like to present the fruits of not only the last year's effort, but also and especially the fruits of the 5 years we have spent enriching our skills and strengthening our potential at the Faculty of International Relations at the University of Economics in Bratislava. It comes with great pleasure to us to be holding the tradition of organizing the Model Conference despite all the obstacles and hurdles that have stood in the way. This conference has come a long way since 2007 and has surpassed the various challenges our colleagues have faced over the years. As a result, from having this conference with just a few participants back in 2007, we have come a long way in making the conference a huge success, with organizing an open event available to the public and bestowing the patronage from the highest ranking Slovak political positions. This year, the conference holds an even greater special value because this is the first time in the history of our faculty when the entire conference is taking place by combining digital and live platforms. Due to the changing time caused by the pandemic, we encourage our participants to stay safe and maintain social distancing. For this reason, we decided to broadcast the conference without physical presence of the audience. But nevertheless, we are happy that we could welcome our guests in person, which brings the conference closer to our audience. It is my aspiration that by organizing a hybrid event, we will prove that the students of today have the ability to adapt to the changing circumstances around them and will be prepared for the future. On behalf of the entire team of the Model Conference, I would like to thank everyone who made the organization of this year's event possible. To the board of the university and the faculty, and to the supervisors who gave their very best for the betterment of all the students and for always being ready to share their knowledge and wisdom with us, we thank you. I am proud to be standing here today representing the students we have become. I sincerely believe that we have successfully followed in the footsteps of our predecessors and will leave a meaningful mark for our successors. It is a privilege to be given an opportunity to unite and to make an impact as a team, and to start a new life, the life after graduation, with such a valuable experience that not every student can come across. Once again, thanks to the endeavor given by the students, my colleagues, to our supervisors, sponsors, and to all those who support the conference by joining us today. In the end, I would like to grasp this opportunity to introduce you a short recollection of the history of the 15 years of organizing the Model Conference. Please take a moment to appreciate the commemorative video.
Študenti Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov Ekonomickej univerzity v Bratislave každoročne absolvujú predmet s názvom Negociácie v diplomatickej praxi. Súčasťou predmetu je projekt Modelovej konferencie, ktorý predstavuje študentskú platformu pre simulované medzinárodné rokovania.
Modelová konferencia Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov je úžasný projekt, vedený úžasnými ľuďmi z našej fakulty. V rámci tohto projektu sa odlišíme od ostatných študentov, ktorí aktuálne končia svoje štúdium a spravíme pre seba niečo navyše.
Zvýraznil by som 3 také hlavné dôvody. Zdalo sa mi v tom čase, že študenti Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov majú pomerne málo praxe v odbore, ktorí študovali, a preto som sa nazdával, že modelová konferencia sa mohla vnímať ako istá imitácia reálnej situácie, do ktorej sa po absolutóriu môžu dostať. Tým druhým dôvodom bolo moje celoživotné presvedčenie, že vysoká škola má pripravovať ľudí pre reálnu prax. A tretím dôvodom bola vlastná skúsenosť z podobnej akcie, na ktorú som bol pozvaný a ktorý som sa zúčastnil počas môjho pôsobenia v diplomácii, tesne predtým, než som nastúpil na fakultu. Začiatky boli skôr také spontánne, by som povedal, lebo nie všetci sme mali skúsenosť s niečím takým a myslím si, že prevládal veľký entuziazmus, záujem. Povedal by som, že až taká radosť z toho, z niečoho takého nového, nepoznaného. Ako som už naznačil, možno tú takú spontánnosť a taký veľký záujem, ktorý ma vtedy prekvapil zo strany študentov, rád na to veľmi spomínam. No, aby jednoducho bola užitočná, aby tá tradícia pokračovala, pokiaľ vedenie fakulty, ale aj najmä samotní študenti dospejú k záveru, že im to vie pomôcť v ich budúcej profesii. Takže želám študentom primárne veľa zdravia v tejto dnešnej dobe. Želám im, aby mohli reálne využiť profesiu, ktorú na tejto úspešnej fakulte vyštudujú. No a želám modelovej konferencii, aby trvala veľa rokov do budúcna.
Hello everyone and welcome on the panel of political section of Model Conference. My name is Juraj Sikora and I am team leader of political section of Model Conference at the Faculty of International Relations. And I will also moderate this panel, which will be dedicated to the topic of migration. First of all, I would like to tell you something about our political section. Our delegates were negotiating whole semester, 2 semesters, on the topic of migration, specifically in the issues like mandatory quotas, readmission agreements, but also aging of the population in Europe, and as well as, of course, conflict in the Ukraine in context of migration. Please let me use this opportunity to thank our members of political section for their amazing work during all seminars, and also for their fruitful contribution to the topic. And also our thanks goes to our supervisor for mentoring us and leading us all the time. So thank you, and I think now we can proceed to our panel of Model Conference. But first of all, let me introduce our honorable guests. We have here Zuzana Čaputovej, Director of Human Rights League. Welcome here. Also Aneta Világi, Vice Dean and for the International Relations and Political Scientist from Communist University. And last but not least, Vladimír Šimoniak, Director of Crisis Management Department at Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome. Thank you all, and let's start this discussion. But before that, I would like to encourage you, dear participants, to ask the questions on Slido app. So our panelists will be happy to answer it. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So they will be happy to answer it. And now we can start this discussion. And my first question is kind of general. Is this migration crisis different from the previous ones? And if yes, in which aspects? Mr. Šimoniak, we can start with you.
I think it's, each migration crisis is a bit different, and at the same time they share some of the main features of the other ones. So this is also what I think we are seeing right now. And I'd like to encourage everybody to be a bit reluctant to make some final conclusions, because we are only a month in. And these things, a month in is not even the end of the beginning. So we need to, let's say, keep, I think, our final judgment on the differences and commonalities for some point in the future. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Világi.
Okay, so as my field of research is mainly domestic politics and within the European context, I would rather focus on how different it is perceived in Slovakia at domestic level. and I might see like two different points of view or some differences in how this crisis is perceived. One would be the proximity. Unlike the previous war conflicts that actually happen in Middle East, and somehow for our people it was far away, this one is at our borders, and this somehow also influence our perception of that it's important and this is really danger, and it somehow justifies and also it's a little bit different conflict, so it somehow justifies those who need to find shelter in other countries abroad from Ukraine. And the second difference would be in perception of the refugees or those who actually seek for shelter in Slovakia, as for politicians who very gladly misused the previous migration crisis to actually somehow alienate those people coming and asking for help, and make them a kind of threat to the domestic population. Right now, this is quite difficult because it's a very difficult to actually make a threat about different culture or different religion, because this is not the case. The Ukrainians are much more closer to our like Slovak traditional perception of our culture and religious beliefs. So this might make this a different kind of crisis from the perspective of how we perceive it.
I will just have, I'm sorry, just one follow-up question. So you consider this crisis different by the approach of the society in Slovakia and also in the European Union to the migrants, to the refugees from Ukraine, that they are closer to us than in the past, right?
As I mentioned, what is different is that it's much more difficult to make this kind of refugees and people who ask for shelter to misuse this crisis for making them and try to, by politicians, to actually present them as a danger, a real danger for the society and stability of the country. Well, stability is different maybe from other points of view, but at least it's definitely not a danger to the traditional culture and religious beliefs in Slovakia. Such.
Yeah, I agree with this point. And the floor is yours, Mrs. Šteblová.
Well, firstly to say, I would like to stress that doesn't matter actually who is suffering, but the war actually leaves the very same suffering on human beings, which is felt by them in very similar way. It doesn't matter what skin color you are, but if you are raped or killed, your family members are killed and you have to escape from your home, you suffer. Doesn't matter whether you are from Afghanistan, Syria, Ukraine or Slovakia. So I think there is a lot of similarity with many other war conflicts which we have experienced in our far history, or with the experience of people from former Yugoslavia, or with more recent conflicts like in Syria, Iraq, or in countries of Africa. And to me, actually, this war in Ukraine is kind of a circle coming to form, because I am maybe one of the few persons who have been here in 2005 when I was starting to work with refugees, and the very first clients of mine were actually Chechen refugees coming from Grozny and other parts of Chechnya when Russia was performing those atrocities in Grozny and Chechnya. So and now I am witnessing another conflict when Russia is killing innocent civilians. So to me it has also a different meaning of kind of history, or my personal history of involvement with refugees repeating itself.
I understand. I have just one follow-up question. You said that it doesn't matter the color of the skin when there is a war, but I think the perception of the migration was different, and you must agree with me that it was different in 2015 than it is now. And also, you just said that you remember the war in the Chechnya, and maybe you can also elaborate this, that if that I really don't know if that we could call that migration crisis, but you can tell if it was different, if the perception of that refugees from Chechnya was different than it is now, or if it was the same.
Well, certainly, if we want to talk about the perception of ourselves towards the suffering of other people, it's a very human nature that you actually feel more emotional towards people who resemble you than towards the other ones. But my first entry was actually more about how people who are affected by war, who are civilians and who are victims of war, are actually feeling the suffering. This is all the same. So people suffer by war wherever the war happens. What is different here, it's our perception of war victims and refugees.
Thank you. I have just some follow-up question in this topic for you all. Do you think that we have learned something from previous crises, which we see today? It's better than it was in the past. Mr. Šimoniak, we can start with you.
Thank you. Well, my personal perception of the differences between 2015, let's say, and today have been shaped by my experience of being actually posted to Brussels in 2015. What I see now is a much better processing of data, if you want. In 2015, there was a lot of talk between very senior leaders about very fundamental data sets. It wasn't really conducive to a lot of empathy and confidence in the room, very often. Now, we do have a very good situational picture about what's happening, there is even a pretty good capability of predicting what's likely to happen in the following weeks or months. And I think the whole decision-making process is more grounded in actual facts rather than perceptions and other things that are more intangible, which I think is a much more productive basis for deliberations of any kind. There is also a let's say learning curve that I think has been that's behind us collectively, now speaking about the EU, let's say. Most stakeholders seem to be very much aware about the possible repercussions on Schengen. They also seem to be very much aware about what problems to Schengen mean to the wider European project. That's something that was not as acutely present in 2015. So that's another thing that I tend to believe is positive today compared to the last time. And also, what has happened, I think a few weeks ago, was the triggering of the Temporary Protection Directive, which is something that had been missing in 2015 for reasons I unfortunately cannot explain, because I don't know what kind of reasons were there. So this is also something that I feel is a part of the learning curve. And European institutions, national governments, have this tendency of being opaque about their learning curves, about their processing of the lessons from the last time. But I think a quite substantial improvement is something that we see in action every day.
Thank you. One more question. You said that we have much better data and information now than we had in the past. Is it because the US and UK intelligence services that fill us with the data, which was not maybe same in the past? Or why is that? Because now we can hear a lot of signals and a lot of information that our allies in US are informing us much more about what is going on in Ukraine, and was informing us before the conflict started than it was in the past. So it is because our allies this big better data assessment?
Well, we need to distinguish between military intelligence, which I'm not really at liberty of speaking about, obviously, but I tend to believe that, yes, there are significant intelligence capabilities shared within NATO. But when it comes to migration, more specifically, and the impact of the events in Ukraine, actually the picture of the migration movements unfolding in Ukraine. I think this is a homegrown, if I may say so, capability that we are having both as a national government and as the European Union. This is something that has been largely missing 2015, and we very happily have now. And I tend to believe those capabilities are largely independent from the UK and the US. Not because they wouldn't have those capabilities, but because the focus is different. There is really a very immediate perception of urgency on the level of the EU about large-scale movements of people for whatever reason.
Thank you. Let's come back to the original question, Ms. Vilagi.
Okay, so from the EU level and the learning curves at this level, I would come back to domestic level. And speaking about learning from our experience from the 2015-16 crisis, well, there was not so much to learn from, right? Speaking about Slovakia and this 2015 crisis, it was actually non-existent from the as factual point of view. When we look at the discourse of politicians and how they use this crisis in pre-election campaign, well, it was completely different picture. But when we look at the reality and how many refugees or how many asylum seekers actually enter the country and ask for this kind of protection, it was really like non-existing crisis. It was not crisis for us. So we don't have a lot of from which to learn, actually. I would say that from this perspective, maybe pandemic crisis was something that prepared us better for this kind of crisis than the previous migration crisis in 2015.
Ms. Števlová?
Well, I must agree with Ms. Viladi, because in Human Rights League we were working with the authorities for a very long time, and we were trying to persuade them to actually strengthen their capacities to deal with migration and especially integration of migrants, because although we really in Slovakia we haven't had experience with large influx of refugees in our recent history, we've had over the last 5 years experience of arrivals of many work migrants, especially from Ukraine and Serbia, and our municipalities were quite frankly unprepared for those people settling down in thousands in their municipal parts. So we were actually actively lobbying previous government to strengthen especially municipal capacities to be able to provide migrants with integration orientation courses, Slovak language courses, and so on. But it was not really heard by the previous government. So yes, this crisis, I think, is very new in the terms of numbers and the pressure it has put on Slovakia, and unfortunately, it would have been better in the terms of integration if the capacities would have been already there regarding the work migration, because then it would be only the question of making them larger. But well, it hasn't been done when we had the chance of preparing it. So now it will have to be prepared once the people will start to think about long-term settlement, if the war will change into protracted conflict and the immediate return of Ukrainian temporary protection holders would not be possible.
Yes, and we will of course talk about the municipalities and NGOs in other questions, but now I have another question. But before that, I would like to encourage you again to ask a question via Slido app, because you have a unique opportunity to ask our panelists to question which you are interested in. So go for that. And now we will proceed to next question, because I think that and maybe you disagree, but I think we occurred in a paradoxical situation, because in the past we really didn't tend to help the EU countries such as Greece to help or deal which had to deal with the refugee arrivals. But now we are the countries which needs to deal with such a situation. So Is it going back to us now, or EU countries show bigger solidarity with us than we did with them in the past? Mr. Šimone, we can start again with you.
Thank you. Well, I think this is one of the differences between last time, if I may say so, and this time. Strictly speaking, I'm not aware of the government actually seeking the kind of solidarity that's been in the mainstream in 2015, shall we say so. I tend to also believe that it's not really the kind of solidarity that's necessary. What is being received, what is being asked for by a government, and what is being received also, is mainly financial support, and I guess that would actually be it. Humanitarian aid, obviously, which is in a certain way the same kind of solidarity we had been offering 2015. So I see actually a lot of change in the politics of the whole thing, rather than the actual kind of solidarity that's found useful in that situation. We also have to see, I think, it's my personal opinion, that there is also a learning curve behind us in that regard. So some of the measures that had been found extremely useful and necessary in 2015 have, in the course of time, been, let's say, found by many observers not to be as productive. That's why I think we also see very little talk about relocations, about redistribution mechanisms. That is really not the main course of debate, and there's a reason why. So I think the situation has changed a bit on the political level in Brussels, if I may say so. And I leave the comments on the national political level to others.
Well, your question somehow suggests that it's some kind of it could be some kind of payback, like it backfired back to us, that we were reluctant to actually offer our solidarity with the countries, other countries of the EU, especially Western countries of the EU. However, I think that this is not really the case today, because we don't need to actually ask for the help as a country, as a government. The Western countries very openly and from the very beginning deliberately address the support for the bordering countries, and whatever we would need to actually somehow solve as a problem, they are offering their help without even asking. And just recently, from the news, we could follow that, for example, government in Netherlands actually very actively promoted their help, and they offered to help with the health problem issues of people coming from Ukraine with cancer disease. So this is something that it's I think it's different from 2015, and that's why it's actually not really a payback, kind of.
Well, maybe it is very important to stress one important difference between this crisis and 2015 crisis is actually the temporary protection and the legal status of Ukrainian refugees. So I agree that this crisis merely can actually show us what is the pressure on the countries who are suddenly having a large numbers of people coming to the territory. But then the legal environment regarding this crisis is very much different, because temporary protection as a protection has been actually created by the EU countries as an answer to former Yugoslavia war. So the intention of the creators have been to actually design a tool that will help us in unlikely event that another war will break up near the European Union territory. So this was also the main reason, or one of the main reasons, why in 2015 the temporary protection has not been applied to people who were that time coming to the European Union through the Mediterranean, because the war in Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan was not actually territorially close to European Union. So it was not an original intent of the creators of the Temporary Protection Directive to use this type of protection for such types of asylum seekers. So those people who were coming to in 2015 to European Union were prospective or actual asylum seekers who were entering asylum procedure, and their legal status as asylum seekers prevented them from traveling further. So as an asylum seeker, you are bound to your first country of entry or to the country where you applied for asylum, depending on your legal status. However, regarding the temporary protection, it is the whole EU decision, which means that actually Ukrainian refugees can self-relocate themselves to the country of the EU of their choice. So they can, yes, we are the first country of entry, and over 250,000 refugees already crossed our borders, but actually only 50,000+ actually stayed, and the rest of them willingly choose to go to other countries, and based on temporary protection directive they have this right to do so. That's why I would say that any conversation about relocations or mandatory relocations are to be futile, because the temporary protection regime actually allows them to choose the country in which they want to seek the temporary protection.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for this answer, and thank you for your positions. But I have two follow-up questions dedicated to the cooperation. Mr. Šimoniak, do you think that also as the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, but also Slovak Republic, cooperate more with other EU member countries than it was in the previous crisis in 2015? Is that cooperation bigger than it was in the past?
Well, certainly it is. Certainly it is, because we are on the receiving end of humanitarian aid, which is a rather unusual position for also the public authorities in Slovakia. Some of the institutional options of support have evolved in the meantime. I mean, European Border and Coast Guard has received a new mandate in 2016 and then I think 2019. So it's a whole different institution, a whole different agency than it used to be before. Several other institutions have, and that's I think part of the learning curve, have adapted to the requirements as they were taken as a lesson from 2015. So I think we cannot really compare the cooperation as it used to exist with the one that's now. There are so many more stakeholders now active on the ground here in our country than there used to be even in the hardest hit countries back then. So I think those are two fully separate and in a way incomparable situations.
Thank you. And also, same question for you, Mrs. Štebulova, but in the context of NGOs, do you compare it more now with other European NGOs that it was in the past?
Well, actually, we compare it now more with the situation in Lebanon or Turkey or any other neighboring country to the country of conflict, because it's very much true what Mr. Šimoniak was just saying. We are now seeing large organizations and donors coming to our country who are usually actually enormously active in the countries that are bordering the war zones. And we are currently a country that is bordering a war zone, so we are really seeing those donors who haven't been active, or those international organizations who traditionally have been active in very different regions of the world, coming to Slovakia. And it's actually also, I would say, a challenge for them, because if we are talking, let's say, about UNHCR, IOM, or UNICEF, or other big UN or international organizations, they are quite used to work in challenging environment where nothing or not many things are actually that well developed, and it's also very difficult for them when they are coming to the EU country that is actually now bordering war zone, and when they see that actually many things are already in place here and working here. They can use more of technology for the aid to refugees. So it's also not only a challenge to us, but also to those international actors, how they are actually thinking about their involvement in countries like Slovakia, Poland, or Hungary.
Yes, thank you. And we have some questions from the audience, so I will read it out loud. I think it's for all of you. Did we, as a country, learn something from the Ukraine refugee crisis that we can use in the future? Do we now have better mechanism that we had before? I think, Mr. Šimoniak, you can start with this question.
Thank you. I think it's too early to tell. I mean, we are gathering a lot of experience literally every day. Now, I'm speaking for the public administration. In what way we are going to absorb that experience, stabilize it, turn it into, a rational analysis of what should have been done differently? This is the big question. Historically, we haven't been, world champions in this, to be honest. So I think this is a separate challenge that is ahead of the state administration, and I hope we're going to do better than we usually do, because this is indeed a historic. This is an event of biblical proportions, and we actually do need to process that experience constructively, because if you look at the kind of change that the whole space east from our borders is going through, okay, there's going to be a vital matter for us as a country to be capable of responding to. So I very much hope that we're going to process this experience the way we should, but it's certainly too early to say whether we are doing that.
Ms. Vilgin?
I certainly agree with Mr. Šimoniak what he said about that we are still learning. We are in the process of learning, because this is just beginning, and I think that it will impact a political system or political life, as well as society, and it actually will impact this with all its pros and cons. So what we are experiencing now, it's kind of social solidarity and quite positive attitudes, but it could be expected that there will be also some cons coming with the crisis, and that it will reflect on political scene as well as on society, and not everything will be so rosy like it looks like right now. So we are learning, and we will learn from this as well, I hope. And last but not least, what I can think is it's difficult to say that it's a valuable lesson. It's probably not. It's a horrible lesson, but we have to actually experience this as well. It's a lesson for society as such, that the war conflict can actually erupt it also in 21st century, that this is not something that it's far, far passed away from us in the history, and this is also from some point of view valuable lesson, and it will have impact on how we perceive the security, how we perceive the readiness of the country for actually dealing with the different kind of potential risks. So this is something will be learning in the process.
Well, there's not much to add after what my previous speakers said. I would say that we know that the solidarity that has been actually expressed from the highest political rankings to actually down bottom of the society has been overwhelming. So I think that's kind of an enriching experience for Slovak society, that such kind of solidarity has been actually expressed towards war refugees, which we haven't seen really maybe from war in Yugoslavia, but I was too little that time to remember it actually properly. So I think that would be a learning experience for Slovak society. And then also, I think we are also witnessing what are we capable of doing in the terms of, let's say, multiculturalism, although this is kind of a tricky word to use. However, we can see that major televisions and media are actually trying to broadcast news in different language, in Ukrainian, which wasn't thinkable before, that institutions are actually trying to work with interpreters to provide services for Ukrainians. Municipalities are thinking how they will adapt their services towards newcomers, and they are strengthening their capacity. So I think this will be kind of a formative experience for Slovak society, also in the terms of building structures and capacities to serve not only Slovak nationals but also foreign inhabitants of Slovakia, which was needed even before, and now the need is even higher. So it will be good to for the society to learn that we are capable of doing it and maintaining these services in dignity against people who are coming to become maybe new inhabitants of Slovakia in the longer term.
And if I may add something, this is probably, and Mr. from diplomacy can actually agree or disagree with me, but this is also important for the country's reputation in the eyes of other partners, because I can remember speaking in academic circles with people from Greece and Italy who were actually much more upfront during the crisis 2015 and 16, and as Mrs. Števová mentioned, that suffering people are humans that are suffering, and to have not kind of understanding for this is something that my colleagues from Greece and Italy could not actually comprehend freely, like what's wrong with you, why this is so difficult to understand that they need a help, because they are many of them are people coming from war conflicts or zones. So this is something that actually can help also Slovakia as a country to gain the reputation of a country that it's capable of understanding the suffering of others.
Thank you. You had really something to add, so thank you. Before we will proceed to next question, I would like to also take one question from the audience. Hungarian elections were won by Mr. Orbán party once again. His rhetoric in spite of Ukraine is kind of depressing. Is the Hungary parting away from EU values? And again, I think we can start with you, Mr. Šimoniak.
I prefer you didn't start with me. But anyhow, you did. Okay. Well, it's difficult to say anything else than to state the facts. I mean, Fidesz has won the elections in Hungary by a pretty large margin in the context of what's been also happening in Ukraine. I mean, we are, as I'm going to repeat myself, only a month in, and there are going to be several elections, I suspect, that are going to be impacted by the events in Ukraine and by the reactions of domestic political players to those events. The French presidential elections come to mind. It's going to have very, very significant impact on the EU. When it comes to the consistency of Hungarian government's policies and EU values, this is a very extensive topic that's been ongoing for years, and I think this is going to be another element of that conversation. And we need to actually see how these policies are going to evolve, because, you know, a lot of statements taken a week, made a week before elections are taken with a grain of salt, you know. This is a demanding time for every political stakeholder, you know, being ahead of elections. And I think if we look at the hard facts, the picture might be a bit more assuring than the rhetorics. Hungary has not been opposing any sort of sanctions that had been which had been imposed on Russia, which we have to admit has been a theory that they would a couple of months ago. So I think a bit of distance is also advisable in this regard. So, you know, having a bit of cooling off period after elections is always a good thing, and then to observe how closely the actions match the words could lead us to a better understanding whether there is a discrepancy between really what values and policies are.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Vilagi, you can answer, but I have one more follow-up question for you, which I can't ask Mr. Šimoniak. Did Mr. Orbán use the migration as the part of the campaign again in these elections, or do you think it wasn't so significant now?
So I actually didn't follow the Hungarian election so close that I could be confident to answer you properly. I have only the news information, so I am not going to answer this question. But speaking about the Hungary and European values and so on. One of those messages Mr. Orbán is spreading around is that don't listen to me what I say, look what I do. And taking this as an methodology how to observe the Hungarian politics, we can look at how he's performing at the EU level, and this is completely, as was said, this is in line with the EU policies, especially in those cases where we were afraid that it might be somehow different and it might be problematic. On the other hand, when we don't look what he does, or what he is performing, but what he's speaking, and this rhetoric is like something that is significant for Orbán back home at domestic level, using anti-Brussels rhetoric, using also anti-immigration, using more pro-Russian narratives. This is something that it's part of his politics, and he's using this strategically. And from this point of view, I think that there is a deterioration from democratic values, not EU level values, but democratic values. Even when we look at the way how the elections in Hungary are actually like free, but they are not very fair, and so on, how the media are used by the government, and so on and so forth. This is something that I can see that there is a curve towards or backsliding from democratic values.
Yes, and we have to also focus on the issue of rule of law. We know that the rule of law is the founding principle of the European Union. And we have actually a tool now, the Rule of Law report, that is published annually. And we know that there are two main countries in the European Union where are the main concerns about the rule of law, and those are Hungary and Poland. So I think that we should still be much aware of what's going on in both those countries regarding the dismantling the principles of rule of law and human rights. And then also we should not actually forget that Mr. Orbán is not afraid to attack the minorities in his country in order to gain victory. This year or this election campaign, it has been the sexual minority, the LGBTQI persons, and this also is violating the founding principles of the European Union, including the respect to human rights and the rule of law. So I'm still very much concerned about what's going on with Hungary, and we will see how the rule of law mechanism will actually affect the distribution of the EU funding to Hungary, but also to Poland.
Thank you very much. I think our audience is satisfied with this answer. And now I would like to proceed to my next question. And so let's go back to Slovak Republic. How is Slovak Republic managing the influx of the refugees? Because there are a lot of signals that without the NGOs and municipalities, it would be much worse on the borders. So, and now we have unique opportunity now because we have here representative of NGO and also from the state sector. So I would like to use it and ask you at first, Ms. Števulova, how is it going on the border? Are we good at it, at managing the crisis?
Well, actually, maybe to make it more specific, it's not only border now, but it's concerning the whole territory of Slovakia, because people are not only crossing the border, but they are also moving through the territory and settling down in many different locations, not only in the capital city, where the most numbers of people who are already having temporary refuge are actually settling down, but I think we can now find people being housed all around Slovakia. So it's kind of a pressure even on the smaller towns and municipalities that they previously thought that immigration and integration of arriving people of migratory background is not something they would have to deal with, but suddenly with Ukrainian refugees, it's a topic that they have to actually approach and kind of deal with on everyday basis. So naturally the border protection is the issue that mostly belongs to the Ministry of Interior, because the borders are protected by the police, and it's a police that actually controls the entry into territory, and it has been really a lot of pressure on the Ministry of Interior as such, because nobody expected before to have such a large arrivals of those numbers of refugees in such a short time as we had. And as we said previously, well, it's not hidden thing to say that we haven't been prepared in the terms of migration crisis management for something like this, like for the crisis like this, because nobody ever actually expected that something like this will ever happen. So I think this was also the reason why maybe the answer of the state at the beginning was slow, and the majority of the work, also not only at the borders but also inland, were done by volunteers and NGOs. And I think the things were or have been improving every day, and it is now 6 weeks after the beginning of the crisis much better than it has been at the beginning. Naturally, people are and organizations are much more cooperating. My NGO is very much cooperating with immigration police, because we are providing assistance to them in Trnava, where our colleagues and her students are actually working directly at the Department of Immigration Police of Trnava and doing the pre-registration. And we are also involved in a hotspot in Bratislava, in the former bus station, where we are responsible for volunteers, translation, and legal aid. So we can see, and such examples you can find all around Slovakia, that actually NGOs, volunteers, state and municipalities are cooperating, because you cannot maintain this crisis without such cooperation. So I would say that this is also a unique opportunity in the terms like what can be achieved once all the actors involved are in cooperation. So this is also a very good, I would say, learning experience for all of us, that we are now actually in the position of mutual trust, which hasn't been the reality before. What NGOs are still actually missing is a financial scheme to actually allow them to carry on their activities further, because we have already been experiencing private donors and international organizations to come and fund our activities, but in this term, state as such hasn't offered any financial scheme to actually repay us the costs that we have already invested into assistance.
Thank you. Mr. Šimoniak, what is your position in this question?
Thank you. Well, first I want to react that the state hasn't offered you any financial scheme. We are working on it. Okay, wait for it. No, I mean, I can largely agree with what Zuzana has said. Just to give you an idea about the proportions. As of this morning, close to 300,000 people have crossed the Ukrainian border, which is equivalent to 6% of the population of this country. In terms of Germany, that would be 10 million people. So we are speaking about a proportion of migration that has been unknown so far, I think not only in Slovakia. As a response to that, I think it's safe to say that the state, the municipalities, the NGOs, private individuals have together created more institutions and processes than in the last 30 years, within a month, okay? So this is the pace and the extent of the effort that's taking place here. And I think it was really very encouraging to see how uniformly the mobilization took place across the society, regions, municipalities, NGOs, private individuals. plenty of small businesses getting active out of their own initiative. That's remarkable and impressive, I think. Now, what can we do, or what should we do in order to maintain this mobilization? First, I don't think it's possible to maintain this for long. NGOs, municipalities, others are incurring costs. Even if we reach a workable scheme of reimbursing those costs, the readiness is not going to take for long. This is one of the things that is a consistent experience from migration crises elsewhere in the world. So eventually, the state needs to get ready to bearing a lot of the effort by its own means. Not even municipalities are going to be very willing to carry those efforts for long. And this is something that I believe is the core question of today. How to make this sustainable in taking away these efforts from those who have voluntarily taken them on themselves. And this is something where I don't have a clear answer. And I think, I know as a fact that this is being analyzed, this is being talked about at very senior levels of government, and I hope we're going to have a very clear answer before long.
Thank you. Mr. Vilak, you can answer, but I have one follow-up question, because also Mrs. Števolo and Mr. Šimoniak were diplomatic in their answer, but I want to ask you as the political scientist, do you think that the state or the government is coping with this crisis right, or there is too much on the shoulders of the municipalities and NGOs, as we see, I think every day in the news, that NGOs have too much to work there, and the state is not so implemented in this whole process adequately. So.
I am going to repeat once again what was already said, that this is just beginning, and it's very early to actually really assess how we deal with the crisis. But when we look at the time we already spent dealing with the crisis and the approach of the state, once you are doing something, you always can do this better. It's no way to actually somehow deny that there might be improvement. On the other hand, I can understand, and I'm taking this lesson from my microcosmos at the faculty. Once the crisis erupted, as a management of the faculty, we started to think how to systematically approach what would be the needs of those who are coming, and how we can systematically approach them, and what we can offer as a systematic aid. At the same time, when we were starting to think about this, our students amazingly just start to organize themselves, those speaking the language like Ukrainian, Russian, start to organize support for those who are coming from Ukrainian. And this is very similar to what actually happened at the state level. The state and ministries start to think about how to approach this, and the NGO sectors and those who are actually much more flexible and have more experiences in dealing with the migration on day-to-day basis, just very ready already to start helping. Okay, I can understand that there is criticism that the state, especially living in the crisis of pandemic, like living in the times of pandemic crisis, and with the information on war conflict or some kind of military conflict, possible military conflict in our neighborhood, should be more prepared. But still, I think this is something that was managed, maybe not stellar, but still somehow that it's quite okay. It's something that we don't actually completely mismanaged as a state.
Thank you for the position, and I see that our time is almost up, but we have time for a few more questions. And I would like to connect my question with the question from the audience, because assuming the conflict will last longer, do you think that EU countries will agree to adopt mandatory quotas? It can be also connected with the presidential with the elections in Hungary, and because currently countries that have blocked mandatory quotas in the past are directly affected. So now it could be different than it was in the past. And maybe Mrs. Vilagi, we can start again with you in this question.
Okay, I am going to actually follow the answer of Zuzana. She tried to explain that those refugees or people seeking for shelter and protection are different in a way that actually no quotas are needed right now, because they have the right to travel around the EU with no problems when they enter the EU. So this is probably not the question. If your question would be if after this crisis maybe, or in a shadow of this crisis, the new policy impetus for how to deal with the migration policy at the EU level will arise, I think this is still on the table, and it was not out of the table since 2015, and only COVID pandemic somehow maybe slower the process, but the dialogues and negotiation and how to actually solve this, because it was not solved, was still on, if I'm not mistaken. Somehow maybe, okay. But quotas are not the questions, or they don't name them as quotas anymore.
Okay. Do you have something to add?
Well, I think this is a question that's going to come up in the agenda, particularly in Brussels, in I think May and June. And my estimate is that the talk will end without any sort of specific conclusion. And I think the idea of any sort of quota-based redistribution is going to be also damaged, if you want, in the long term by that. So that is where I see the dynamic heading. The thing is that, as a difference to what was happening in 2015, there is no clear trade-off behind that. There is no clean-cut group of member states asking for redistribution right now, and there is no clean-cut group of member states supporting the idea of redistribution as an exchange for, let's say, reinforced border management. One of the first things that we had been doing in practice was to maintain the registration of all incoming migrants from Ukraine. So we wanted to maintain the standards of the Schengen external border. The same went for Hungary, of course, Poland, Romania, even if they are not fully in Schengen. So the situation is structurally very different from what was there in 2015, and I don't see, the kind of political energy, if you want, in the issue this time around as it was in 2015. I'm quite sure it's going to come up in the agenda at some point, but I don't see a lot of success for that initiative.
Ms. Čaputová, do you agree with these positions?
Well, I already answered this question in a way that, I don't really see the reason why mandatory quotas would be required at this time, when really the legal regime of Ukrainian refugees now is very different, and they can self-relocate themselves freely. So I think the only question remains, like, how the Poland will deal with these large numbers that they are receiving far above any other countries. But again, the answer may be either more financial help and building more capacities, or the Ukrainian refugees who went firstly into Poland will move forward, because Ukrainian diaspora actually has been quite large in the European Union. There are large numbers in Italy, in other countries, so people can be feeling to move further to their friends or relatives who are living in other countries of the European Union.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have time for one last question, and it's kind of a general one. What are the key takeaways of this crisis? What do you think that it could change from what this crisis could change in European Union and also with the process of solutions such as crisis in the future? Mr. Šimoniak, we can start with you.
Thank you. I think the first takeaway at this point, it's quite early, as I've said earlier, is the realization in Europe that we are living in a much more hostile environment than we used to. This sort of stimulates more realistic or more instrument-based thinking about how to approach our neighborhood rather than the more values-based thinking. And this is something that needs to be internalized, needs to be brought into action. And I think this is something that we're going to see in the future as influencing a lot of things.
Yes, thank you. Mrs. Vilagi, and also maybe with a follow-up question, if you think that it will something can change with this crisis is the voting in the common foreign security policy, if we can proceed to the voting in qualified majority voting, which is never-ending story in the European Union.
I know that it's common in EU that with the crisis, the things start to move and to change, and the crisis may function like impetus for actually moving forward and press for political changes and especially decision-making changes, procedures changes. However, I am not very optimistic in this. It might be like we are a step closer maybe to in this discussion, but not really. I wouldn't expect that this will be takeover from this crisis. That we will actually have a majority voting mechanism in foreign policy area at the EU. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic at the end, but I think one of the takeover from this crisis and from various crises in a row is that actually this golden age is already behind us, and now we have to adapt to much difficult times and to take it as a new normal. Otherwise, we will suffer like a society from too much frustration and disillusionment that it could be in a year or two better. No way. So this may be a takeover.
Thank you. And Mrs. Števolák, take away from you.
Yeah, I very much agree with Ms. Vilagi. I think, yes, on one hand, this is the solidarity we have been talking about, but on the other way, I think being in a crisis, it's actually being to be our new normal, and because we don't only face Ukrainian refugee crisis, but also we haven't spoken about energies and rising prices, which I think is now kind of overshadowed by Ukrainian crisis, but it's maybe in large parts of our society becoming a leading thing in their perceivement of the reality. Then we still haven't done much about the climate crisis, which will change our lives during our lifetime. So this is an issue that we have to solve urgently, rather urgently, I would say. So we have to start to prepare the society, or the leaders have to start to prepare the society that we are already living in challenging times, and that it will become, or it is already our new reality. We have to adapt to it. We have to feel confident in ourselves, because I think the biggest learning experience of this crisis maybe for Slovakia can be that we finally act as a part of the EU, which means the part of the most secure, the most rich, whatever is the best part of the world, which is presented usually to the other parts of the world. And we are finally actually showing this also in the terms how we are handling the crisis, because we are those who are now helping, not the ones that are actually asking for help. So we have to just maintain the feeling that we can overcome any other crisis that comes, because we are part of the powerful EU and NATO and Western world bloc that actually secures kind of a life that we would like to live. So I think that's very important, if this will actually be kind of a learning lesson for our society.
Yes. Thank you for your takeaways, and thank you also for your answer and fruitful discussion, because our time is up now. So I would like to formally end this panel, and thank you very much, dear speakers, for your participation today and your information that you provided to our audience. Our today's panelists were Aneta Világi, Zuzana Čaputová, and Vladimír Šimoniak. Thank you once again, and looking forward to next opportunities when we will have the opportunity to talk with each other about such a topics. And our thanks goes also to you, to our audience, for the question on the Slido and for joining our panel today. Now we will have a quick break, but stay tuned, because we will start at 11:15 with the next panel, which will be environmental section panel. So thank you very much, and see you at another opportunity.
Študenti Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov Ekonomickej univerzity v Bratislave každoročne absolvujú predmet s názvom Negociácie v diplomatickej praxi. Súčasťou predmetu je projekt Modelovej konferencie, ktorý predstavuje študentskú platformu pre simulované medzinárodné rokovania.
Modelová konferencia Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov je úžasný projekt, vedený úžasnými ľuďmi z našej fakulty. V rámci tohto projektu sa odlišíme od ostatných študentov, ktorí aktuálne končia svoje štúdium a spravíme pre seba niečo navyše.
Zvýraznil by som tri také hlavné dôvody. Zdalo sa mi v tom čase, že študenti Fakulty medzinárodných vzťahov majú pomerne málo praxe v odbore, ktorí študovali, a preto som sa nazdával, že Modelová konferencia sa mohla vnímať ako istá imitácia reálnej situácie, do ktorej sa po absolutóriu môžu dostať. Tým druhým dôvodom bolo moje celoživotné presvedčenie, že vysoká škola má pripravovať ľudí pre reálnu prax. A tretím dôvodom bola vlastná skúsenosť z podobnej akcie, na ktorú som bol pozvaný a ktorej som sa zúčastnil počas môjho pôsobenia v diplomácii, tesne predtým, než som nastúpil na fakultu. Začiatky boli skôr také spontánne, by som povedal, lebo nie všetci sme mali skúsenosť s niečím takým a myslím si, že prevládal veľký entuziazmus, záujem. Povedal by som, že až taká radosť z toho, z niečoho takého nového nepoznaného. Ako som už naznačil, možno tú takú spontánnosť a taký veľký záujem, ktorý ma vtedy prekvapil zo strany študentov, rád na to veľmi spomínam. No, aby jednoducho bola užitočná, aby tá tradícia pokračovala, pokiaľ vedenie fakulty, ale aj najmä samotní študenti dospejú k záveru, že im to vie pomôcť v ich budúcej profesii. Takže želám študentom primárne veľa zdravia v tejto dnešnej dobe. Želám im, aby mohli reálne využiť profesiu, ktorú na tejto úspešnej fakulte vyštudujú. No a želám modelovej konferencii, aby trvala veľa rokov do budúcna.
Welcome back at our 15th Model Conference, and after the break we would like to continue with the panel discussion of our environmental section. Our main focus during the whole academic year was the climate neutrality, climate change, and the EU's key objective of becoming carbon neutral by the year 2050. Throughout the year we discussed energetical topics, as well as topics related to circular economy, more effective agricultural sector, and sustainable transport in connection with the EU and its member states. Today, as the last part of our negotiations, we would like to discuss the final conclusions and current environmental issues with our honorable guests. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our guests, who unfortunately couldn't come in person, so our panel discussion will take place only in the virtual world. Hopefully, the situation will allow us to organize the next model conference in person. So, I would like to welcome our first guest, which is Mrs. Sevim Aktas, who acts as a policy officer at the Directorate General at the European Commission. And Mrs. Aktas also brings people closer to the functioning of the European Union through social networks. Welcome, Mrs. Aktas. We are also honored to have Mrs. Ivana Maleš, co-founder of the Institute of Circular Economy. Her main focus is on environmental policy and strategies in the circular economy. Mrs. Maleš, as well as the Institute of Circular Economy, provides consulting for municipalities, private companies, and education in field of circular economy. Welcome.
Hello.
Our next guest is Milan Zvera, who acts as a director of the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Reduction Policy Department at the Ministry of Environment of the Slovak Republic, and he deals with topics such as reducing emissions, the European emissions trading system, but also climate change in general. Welcome, Mr. Zvera.
Good morning. Thank you.
And last but not least, I would like to welcome also Mr. Rastislav Staník from the Slovak Environmental Agency, who was able to join us even on such short notice. At the Slovak Environmental Agency, Mr. Staník acts as a project coordinator for the project elaboration of the documents of local territorial systems of ecological stability and supports development of principal starting base for regulation of the green infrastructure development. Welcome, Mr. Staník.
Hi.
My name is Andrea Polovčíková and I am a fifth-year student at the Faculty of International Relations at the University of Economics in Bratislava, and I was elected team leader of our environmental section, and I will lead today's panel. I would like to once again thank you all for joining us today, and our panel will have a form of discussion about prepared topics. Just like with the political panel, I would like to remind you that during the whole panel discussion, you are more than welcome to ask any questions, even if they are controversial, directly via platform Slido, using the hashtag that you can see below. I would like to encourage you all to participate and contribute to our discussion using the link. And because of the shortness of the time, I would like to go straight to the questions that we have prepared for our guests, and I would like to encourage you, dear speakers, to feel free to react or comment on discussed matters. So, Mrs. Aktas, I would like to start the discussion with problematics of nuclear energy, and the opinions on this matter differ within the EU countries. As we know, nuclear energy is a very clean energy with low CO2 emissions during the whole cycle. However, it is extremely dangerous regarding the waste and the possibility of a nuclear disaster. So what is your opinion about nuclear power plants as possible solutions in reaching the zero emissions target? There are European countries which have many nuclear power plants, and there are also many which are against them. If we look, for example, at the Germany, they are about to close all the nuclear power plants by the end of this year, but many people are concerned that their energetic production just won't be sufficient, and they might add to the energy crisis that is ongoing due to the war in the Ukraine. For example, Austria, Portugal, Denmark, and Luxembourg are huge economies that are also against the support of nuclear energy within the EU. And France, Finland, or even Slovakia are in a strong support of this form of energy production. So if you could please provide us with your opinion.
Sure. First of all, I missed the queue earlier. So welcome everyone. Very nice being here. Also a pleasure to be here with the fellow panelists. Nice to meet you all. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Coming back to your question, Andrea. So nuclear is a very delicate, highly opinionated technology. And let me start off by saying that I am not pro or con nuclear, and in general I find it really important in my job to stay objective with any judgment. So this is not about my values, just to put this as a disclaimer. Nuclear, as you said, has indeed a very unique risk profile. And is it with the waste problem or the dangers of nuclear disaster? these are just the most common things that we hear about nuclear. However, there are a couple of more things to know about this technology. So first of all, when we talk about using nuclear as an alternative for climate change mitigation, we often think, oh, that it's going to build from one day to another. However, usually it takes more than 10 years to build a nuclear plant from start to finish. So that's a little bit too much if we consider the time span that we have when it comes to net zero by 2050. On top of that, nuclear projects are often related to delays and cost overruns. So that's also a consideration that we need to take into account. Also, keep in mind that electricity generated by nuclear is 2 to 5 times more expensive than electricity generated by wind or solar power. So you can say, well, we need something for the times where sun and wind is not available. And sure, but in a power system dominated by variable new renewable energies, it is not flexible enough. So when we look at nuclear, it takes around a full day to ramp up to full power production. That means that when we know, for example, that solar energy is not going to be sufficient in, let's say, around 4 hours, nuclear cannot chip in because it simply takes too long to power up. It's a totally underestimated and really not often discussed about fact, but you can think of it as such. What we need is an Apple Mac laptop. You flip it open and it turns on immediately, but nuclear is more like a Windows 95, let me say, so a really old version. It takes ages to turn on, and that's not what we need, and that's not what we require. So when we talk about alternative technologies, replacing or like chipping in instead of renewable energies, it goes beyond nuclear power. So ultimately what I can tell you is that when you look at the environmental and social costs, like these hazardous working conditions, potential risks, etc., of energy generation technologies, oil, coal, and gas are by far the most harmful technologies. This is something that we need to realize. So this is not also what I'm claiming. This is a meta-study that synthesized data from 140 studies found. So we know that these technologies are extremely hazardous, but as you know, like with many other products, markets tend to externalize these type of costs. We don't pay for the negative environmental costs nor for the social costs, like people directly or indirectly dying. Indirectly could be cancer, for example, nor do we pay for the value of public goods like clean air. So when we look at the environmental and social costs, risks, if you like, of nuclear, especially when it's updated technology, like especially of nuclear, in its current state, so thinking of like that the technology is also more updated than what we know in the past, and also that the safety measures will be updated, nuclear is not that bad. And that is also what the EU taxonomy is saying. So the taxonomy, I'm not sure whether you guys heard about this. It's been highly discussed because of a couple of controversies, or exactly because of the disagreeing opinions about certain types of technologies. But the taxonomy is a guideline from the Commission that classifies which investments count as green and which not. So it is a measure against greenwashing ultimately. And this guidebook says that nuclear can be counted as sustainable, but only if the host country can ensure they cause no significant harm. So this goes into the environmental and social costs, no significant harm to the environment, which includes the safe disposal of nuclear waste as well. So we all know it's a highly debated topic, but I can ensure that there are multiple experts, multiple think tanks, multiple, let me say, groups working on it that to mitigate this waste measure. So as I said, ultimately it comes down to regulations, it comes to proper implementation, but this is already a really, really good sign. So all in all, it is a value judgment that's attached to nuclear. There are many more facets to it, but it's not a discussion whether it's good or bad. It's a discussion about what are the requirements of the system and what's going to be the best alternative to what's existent. So that would be my couple of thoughts on nuclear.
Thank you very much. taking all this that you just said into account, and in spite of the information that I mentioned within the first question, I would like to continue and ask you if you think that EU maybe needs some kind of unity in this sector. Do you think that this is going to maybe be our go-to in the future, or are we, the European Union, going to divert from this solution as soon as possible? And one last additional question. Is it even possible at current state of development of renewable energy sources to completely shut down all nuclear power plants in the close future?
So a go-to when you mean this, you're referring to nuclear energy, I suppose, still. So first of all, I think it's really important to make clear that there is not a simple go-to when it comes to energy sources. So every country needs a unique and different energy mix depending on their resources, depending on their markets, depending on their demand. So there are many, many aspects coming together when it comes to deciding what's needed. So every time there's going to be a different best alternative. That could be nuclear, that could be hydrogen, battery storage, geothermal. There's a really big palette of alternative technologies. But solving the climate crisis or mitigating the effects goes beyond the energy sources, or it goes beyond the generation. It's something that we usually talk about, mainly talk about, it's always about the generation sources, but the solutions are way more wide-ranging. So electrifying transport is one thing. Upgrading grids and integrating grids cross-country boundaries is a very important one. So what that means is that the more interconnected our EU electricity grids are, the more easy it gets to send electricity back and forth between countries that are in need. You can think of Spain, etc., being able to produce way more solar when it's super cold here up north. So when the electricity grids are way more integrated, and in Europe we're working on that, and the integration rate is increasing steadily every year, the easier this exchange is going to be. Energy efficiency is a very important one. When it comes to buildings, for example, we notice that especially with the energy crisis right now. Nature solutions like carbon farming, using soils and land and trace, etc., as a carbon sequestration, as a carbon removal option is an important one, but also carbon capture technologies. So there's just a wide range of solutions, and the mindset should be pick and play, in my opinion. And of course, not all technologies are developed yet, but we have the choice to either wait for the best technology to be out there and delay the implementation, eventually risk to be too late, or we go along with the existing technologies, get the most out of them, and innovate and improve on the way. All of this cannot happen without acting together. So this is where EU solidarity and countries acting together comes in, and is an extremely important one. But this also goes beyond Europe. A colleague of mine recently said something really interesting to me. So I'm soon going to work on carbon farming as a topic, and this is a not really explored area, but it basically goes down to farmers or landowners using their tree areas, for example, forest areas, to implement carbon crediting system, where for the carbon sequestrated with their land area, they would get a specific compensation or could sell. So it's a very interesting concept, underexplored, and we're going to dive into it. But I was talking to a colleague of mine about this area, an expert in research and innovation when it comes to climate solutions. And what he says, nice if we're planting trees here in Europe, but if the Amazon rainforest is being deforested continuously, what's the impact that we can have? So international cooperation, acting internationally, becomes extremely important when we're talking about climate solutions. I know we all know this, but when it comes to should we act together, what's the purpose, or what should be the direction, it's extremely important to unify within Europe and also go beyond. I mean, the example that I did, the clearest example in Europe is the grid, integrating the grids. So that would be kind of my answer. I have two recommendations, if I can add them quickly before you take over, Andrea.
Yes,
I know.
Feel free to do so.
But if you're interested into decarbonizing the world or specific areas, I can recommend an amazing book. It's called Speed and Scale by John Doerr. So this is a guy, he's an engineer himself and an investor as well. So he was one of the first investors and board members at Google and Amazon and knows what it means to scale up disruptive companies. So I would highly recommend to check it out. I have it over here actually, and I always like once in a while look at it myself to get a high level overview of what's happening, because sometimes if you're really an expert in some topic or like your tasks are narrowed down, it can be you forget about the big picture. But you mentioned it earlier, Andrea, but if you want something lighter and shorter, but want to keep track of the happenings in the EU and energy climate scene, you can check out my Instagram account, which is called EU Energy Transition Brief. I started this when I joined the Commission. So I basically share like EU energy and climate briefings, short infographics that you can check out. Just to make these topics more accessible to you all. So feel free to have a look as well.
Thank you very much. I actually had a look and it looks very, very good. So I recommend our audience to also do so. And thank you very much for your answer. I would like to encourage our speakers to react if they feel like they have something to add to this topic. And if not, then I would like to continue now with the second question, which is regarding the circular economy. The Circularity Gap Report from 2020 finds that the world is now only 8.6% circular. Of all the minerals, fossil fuels, metals, and biomass that enter it each year, just 8.6% are cycled back. And this has fallen from 9.1% in the 2 years since the annual report was first launched in 2018. Why is this happening, and what measures need to be put in place to reverse this trend? And also, what do you consider the biggest obstacles in higher implementation of recycling practices within the EU countries? And I would like to ask this primarily our guest Ivana Maleš. So Mrs. Maleš, if you could please continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. And I'm really happy to be here with other colleagues and speakers. As you mentioned, the Circularity Gap Report has reported that we are less circular than in a few years back. We were circular 9.1 and now we are circular 8.6. So what happened in between is that our consumption of all the materials has raised. Since there is a really good example in the Circularity Gap Report that from the Paris Agreement in 2015 till COP26 in 2021, we have consumed like 500 billion of materials for this period. So from the 90 gigatons of materials in 2018, we have now scaled up to 100, which is like 10 billions of tons of materials more extracting from our nature, and it is like 70% more than the nature can replenish. So we have been raising our consumption all over the world, and we have been also moving this circularity gap even lower, and our overshoot days are coming closer to January 21 than to December 21st. So this is like one of the biggest obstacles that we are having now, because we are consuming more, although there has been a pandemic. So we have been restricting some of the emissions, but our consumption overall is bigger. It's bigger in the field of housing. So we have been raising our standards all over the world in housing. So more buildings are built, and also in the field of nutrition, in the field of mobility, and in the field of communication, and in the field of services. So this is these are the main like areas where we consume more than we have been consuming like the years before. So the amount of waste, as you mentioned, is rising, and the circularity of material is lower, and this is why we have been producing more and consuming more and recycling less or reusing less. So this is why we have new regulations regarding, for example, the construction and construction waste. So we need really to reconsider how we build our buildings that are also building the consuming all the materials that we extract from the nature, but also as the previous speaker, she mentioned that we also need a lot of like different kind of energies to run these buildings, because in every building there is a house or an office or I don't know some maybe some plant or whatever. So we need energies and we need our buildings to be sustainable. Then we also need to rethink how we do our nutrition, because as we all cannot be maybe vegans, but we can reconsider that we can start to think about our nutrition differently, because it has been a great consumer of our materials, of the natural resources, and emitting a lot of emissions. So this is maybe like the answer to the first part of the question. So we need really to scale up the innovation. We need more data. This is also what Circularity Gap report was mentioning, that we need to track how this circularity is improving, and we need to say what can we do to lessen our emissions in the next few years, because if we would cut our consumption up to 28%, our economy will not fall down, and we can lower our emissions up to 36, maybe to 38%. So this is something that is like a big step for our planet, but it will not somehow endanger our economy or our way of living. So
yes, thank you very much. And I have one additional question where I would maybe like to ask you to be a little bit more brief. And it is in connection with the previous one. And in the sphere of waste in the EU, which is constantly growing, despite the fact that the transition to a climate neutral, resource efficient circular economy is a key part of the European strategy, what effective measures do we lack in EU and Slovak legislation, in your opinion?
Mm-hmm. So when we focus, for example, on Slovakian amount of waste, the municipal, for example, the municipal residual waste is every year lower and lower. What is growing is packaging, and it's like these recyclables, they are growing, and what is growing is also the construction waste. So this is why we have new regularities also regarding the resilience plan, and that we need to take care of this biggest amount of waste that is growing, and that is construction waste. And this is something that we need to focus on, because we have been focusing really a lot to municipal waste and how we can lower the municipal waste, but it's only like 10% of all of our waste. So what we really need to rethink is how we build, how we move. So we need to think about building and construction and mobility, and also about our nutrition to really lower our waste, because we are producing more than we can consume. So this is, I think this would be my message, like to rethink, and our economy will not fall. We will continue to live pretty good life, I think, everyone. And we could help really to be more sustainable.
Thank you very much for your answer. I would like to encourage once again our audience to use the opportunity and ask our guests questions via Slido. And now I would like to get back to the energy sector, which seems to be one of the most crucial also in the past weeks. And I would like to ask about the less discussed form of energy, which could still play an important role in energetic sector, which is geothermal energy. When speaking about Slovakia, it has great potential in the field of geothermal energy, which could be used as a solution for ecological heating and electricity in Slovakia. Sadly, there are not many projects in the field of geothermal energy in Slovakia, and while there are probably more reasons to that, it seems like the main reason is complicated legislation and difficult financing conditions. Specifically speaking about the problem that every geothermal well deeper than 500 meters is subject to a mandatory environmental impact assessment. This complicates and prolongs the permitting process and thus the implementation of projects, and leads to a reduction of investors' interest in implementing projects based on the use of geothermal energy. Is the Slovak government doing anything to change this and to make geothermal energy projects easier to process? And if we are speaking more globally, is EU doing anything to implement geothermal energy more into renewable energy sources, or is it just not very interesting in terms of energy production potential on our continent? And I would like to ask Mr. Zvara to maybe start by answering this question, and then also, of course, if other speakers are interested in commenting, please feel free.
Yep. Thank you very much. I also raised my hand on the previous two topics, but I will touch upon those later. I will start generally. The world is not black and white, so this is why it's also connected with the nuclear energy, and it's also with geothermal, and it's also with the EU. I will start it. We do have, yes, we are starting a modernization fund. It's just under my department as well. And we are planning to finance one project, which is in a Košice region. It's a municipality for using geothermal energy for municipal heating. But this is why I'm coming back to my first phrase, that the world is not black and white. That the complications are coming, yes. There is a problem with environmental impact assessment, which is basically also the project which came here from the European Union, which complicates things. There is other thing is the project or the financing possibility from the modernization fund, which was thought as a finance renewable energy in a heat sector, which this geothermal energy would be the first choice, not the producing electricity, but the heating. But during the course of negotiations and during the course of implementation of the modernization from on the EU scale, we found out that we cannot finance geothermal energy from modernization fund as a priority projects. So it complicates things further. So you see, even though in general the EU projects, EU idea, EU integration, and EU policies are helping us to go forward in the environmental policies, they could also make the things more complicated and slower. That's my whole point. But I'm not just saying that the EU project as per se is a bad thing, because this is always combination of the all, I would say, national priorities, all national politics, all national circumstances, which has to be glued together. And somehow now the compromise those 27, 28 countries and move forward. So in general, this is very helpful for us and for our environmental policies, because it has moved us forward a lot. But for example, in some areas, it has to move us forward faster than we would go. In other, it a little bit slower us because it's a compromise policy. One of the such areas is this nuclear energy. Nuclear energy, let's put it straight. All the scientists would say if we want to go to climate neutrality, we cannot do it without nuclear energy because we don't have the technology which we substituted so far, and we don't have that many options how to reach climate neutrality without nuclear energy. But there is a big push from some of the member states against the nuclear energy, and it complicates. This is the reason why also the many of the projects are delayed. It's also this general hunt against the nuclear energy. But and renewable energy is also great source of energy, but it has also some disadvantages and drawbacks, which is, I'm coming back, this is the world is not black and white. And, you know, even look at us, look at the Slovakia. We use our hydro energy potential a long time ago. We started to dam our best rivers in 30s. It's 100 years ago. We don't have that much potential. We do have a small potential on the other rivers, but there is an environmental concern and environmental impact assessment, for example. So that there is no way forward. We don't have the offshore wind sources. With the biomass, it's a little bit complicated because of the forestry. So there are not that many possibilities how to switch our electricity production from nuclear to other sources. And when you look at other countries, you see that those countries who are switching nuclear power source are switching to gas, natural gas coming from Russia. So I don't think so. This is something which is in the interest of all of us. So I somehow connected geothermal and nuclear and the whole climate neutrality general goal, how to reach there. If I could also touch the circularity, it's also it's something which we have to drive forward more. But my previous speaker was very right in the point that it's not only about circularity, it's more about the consumption. Because when I'm meeting people or also you know, meeting the stakeholders in the climate change and energy policies in Slovakia, there is very often the notion that, yeah, we are fighting against climate change. We are recycling, we are doing with the waste. But when you look at the emissions from Slovakia, there are only 4% of emissions coming from the waste directly. So recycling as per se won't change the problem. We have to look at the consumption. We have to look from all the imports and all the emission carbon footprint coming from all the goods and all the economy, which is based basically on the consumption and producing more and more goods and moving them around the world more and more and faster and longer. So this is the problem of the circularity. So we have to cut it somehow, which would be very difficult, that we have to change the whole narrative and look at the things, how the economy and the people are working and living. So it's a very complicated topic. It is very difficult to go somewhere. And when you look at the COVID, how we change our lives and how a small impact it had on emissions, we could see that how difficult will it be to get to climate neutrality in some quite short time what is planned. This is just general. If you have some more specific questions, I can be more detailed later, because all the questions, all the topics are very so wide-reaching that we can talk about this for several hours.
Yes, of course, but unfortunately we don't have several hours. So I would like to maybe ask Mrs. Aktas if she can maybe react to the topic of geothermal energy and maybe how EU is implementing or not implementing it into the renewable energy sources mix.
So two things. Before diving into geothermal, I would like to quickly react what my peer panelist Milan was saying. It's less a reaction, more a question actually. I wonder which researchers you're referring to when you're saying that many researchers say that nuclear is the way forward, because my go-to sources are the International Energy Agency reports, which I would count as the most reliable ones, as well as the European Commission projection on which energy sources are needed to climate neutrality 2050, and both of them see the role for nuclear minuscule. And I feel like this kind of goes into what I was saying earlier regarding there's so many opinions and so many researchers saying things, and I wonder how many projections we need if we have two really reliable sources already, which is the International Energy Agency as well as the European Commission projections. A lot of experts working on it. I mean, when I also say European Commission, it's mainly expert groups developing these plans with the guidance of the European Commission policy officers like me. How many projections and consultancies and reports we need in order to you know, like decide on a general path forward.
If I may, yes, minuscule. If you mean 20% of the production of electricity is not minuscule, it's even the JRC said on the margin of the taxonomy debate that nuclear has to be part of the solution, and also in your EU strategy says that we cannot reach climate neutrality without nuclear. This is what I was driving at. And the minuscule, of course, we are not saying that we will reach it only with the nuclear. It's a combination of all the sources, but a combination of all the sources, not
exactly
one source preferring only.
What I'm just trying to highlight is I'm not saying nuclear doesn't have a role. It does have a role, but in 2050, it's not, like, based on what you said, it sounded like a lot, but it's really not that much. I think it doesn't go beyond 10%, if at all. Like if I remember correctly, it's around like 4% of nuclear energy that they say. Like it's, but we can double check on this. I mean, I totally apologize. I'm just recalling on my memory right now. But I'm not saying, as I said, I'm not pro or con. As you said as well, and I noted earlier, in a taxonomy, it's considered as sustainable under specific conditions, which is totally fair enough, and I think that's also the path forward. But it shouldn't be a debate about yes or no. It should be a debate about where it's useful and in what context is it useful. And shutting down existing nuclear plants might not be the smartest idea. I totally agree with you on that.
Thank you very much for your reaction, Mrs. Aktas, and I would like to thank you, Mr. Zvara, for your point of view and your comments on the topics, and also thank you for reacting to the previous questions. Because of the shortness of time, like I said, we need to proceed to the next question, and now I would direct it more to Mr. Rastislav Staník. It is again a question which is directly connected with national environmental plans and strategies, and we now see that it is crucial for a country to state its targets to combat climate change. Paris Agreement brought us the national determined contributions to push us even harder for a climate neutral world, and the EU and its countries are safe to say leaders in climate changes measures, but still with most countries we can see huge huge targets in the national strategies, while results are not being delivered, or at least not delivered in promised extent. And in spite of that, do you believe that national environmental plan and strategy of Slovakia is sufficient and cover all necessary areas? And if so, do you believe it is possible to reach promised 55% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030? From 1990 levels, and talking in long term, get to complete neutrality by 2050.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Basically, so the national strategy transposes the EU measures. So I believe it's quite complex, covering all the necessary areas. We are setting these targets. We are very good at setting the targets on the paper, but if you look at the State of the Environment report of Slovakia for 2020, we can see that basically we are on a good path. For example, in comparison with the year 1990, the anthropogenic emissions have decreased by 45%, and between 2019 compared to 2018, there was a decrease of 5.2%. So the trajectory is good on the national level. Also, it was possible to keep the decoupling, so the growth of the economy was not connected with the growth in greenhouse gases emissions. So this is a good indicator that there were some measures implemented in the industry that are actually really decreasing the greenhouse emissions. So overall, the whole picture in Slovakia is quite positive. Of course, we cannot fool ourselves. It's a small economy within the European Union. So maybe this also plays its role. I mean, it's not like, you know, the huge countries like Germany or even Netherlands, which has a lot of business activity. So, but this is these numbers are excluding the sector of land use cover and forestry. So that's also important to notice, because these are the carbon sinks. So we are excluding these carbon sinks from these numbers, and even without them, the numbers are good. So I think, in my opinion, we are on the way. We have a low carbon strategy until 2030. With a view to 2050, and basically our national targets are the same as at the EU level. It's not stricter, but overall trajectory is good. So we shouldn't have issues with reaching these targets in Slovakia. But we need to work on this, of course. I mean, it's like it's not that we can just say, we are good, so that means that we will be good in 10 or 20 years. It's not like that. We need to keep the fight. We need to push for the decoupling, to push for the green technology implementation. Of course, regarding the nuclear energy in Slovakia, this is a part of the energy mix. It is, from the emission points of view, it's very good, but of course it's probably one of the most expensive kind of energy if we count in the nuclear waste management, of course. So this comes at a price. But Slovakia has a great potential also in the geothermal energy, and I think we should use more our potential as it's a highly forested country, so around 41% of Slovakia is forested. So we need to really explore this potential of the ecosystem services that are able to sink the carbon, to maybe transform some sectors of the economy from the more polluting kinds of production to the soft, like tourism, or use of the natural potential in a way that will enhance the ability of the ecosystems. So not just like primary just logging, or just use the country as a resource for materials, but it's absolutely necessary for Slovakia to push in the direction to generate economic growth from the added value activities. So I see a great potential still in this direction. And basically we are at the Slovak Environment Agency trying to promote this. We are also looking very in great detail on the enhancement of the ability of the ecosystems to provide ecosystem services by supporting the ecological connectivity, by looking at how can we make the restoration and rehabilitation of habitats to work better. So these are really important topics. Also on the global scale, we know about the concept of the planetary boundaries. So this is something that we as a humanity really rely on, and I think all our activities need to be juxtaposed against this kind of knowledge, because there is very little, how to say, in my opinion, people don't realize how little or how fragile the ecosystems really are, how fragile is the boundary between when some processes start. So then it's really hard to reverse them when they are negative, because you get this positive feedback action. So this is already happening with the climate change, but we still have a chance. But it's really it's a hard thing to do. So it's always better to look how we can do this in the initial stages, rather than spend a lot of resources to try to reverse it when it gets really bad. So in my opinion, there is a potential to get through this, but we need to simply look at the connections in the environment. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your answer. And I would like to continue with one more question before we go to Slido. And that is the question for all of you, dear speakers. And I would like to hear your opinion very shortly on the question, if you think that the European Union is able to become completely climate neutral by the year 2050. And Mr. Staník, I think that you can start with just simply answering this question.
Yeah, I think yes. Depends on the politics. You know, it's like we have the knowledge, we have the understanding on quite a good level, but the implementation of the policy measures is sometimes lacking. So that it largely depends on the political point, on the political side of the implementation of the knowledge we have.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe Mrs. Males, if you could continue and tell us your opinion.
Yeah, I agree, because when we set up some goals, then we should beat them. But what we really need to do is to accelerate some processes and implementation of the solutions, because as Mr. Janik said, that we have a pretty great knowledge of where we are and what we are supposed to do. So we see, like in this situation with Ukraine, that we can really speed up when we are in some kind of crisis and we are able to find solutions. So we really need to continue to act like there is a climate crisis, because we are still acting that we have a lot of time, but we don't. So what we really need to think is to do is to speed up with implementation of all the solutions that we thought that it could solve the climate change.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zvara?
Yes, this picture is again not black and white. With current technology and with radical, but really radical change of our lifestyle, it's not possible, although the predictions so we can only count on the really revolutionary technology, plus really some big social and economic coexistence. This is why it's very important that the project of the EU will last and will be stronger only. And with this social cohesion, and really radical technological change, we can make it, but currently no.
Thank you very much for your position. And last but not least, Mrs. Aktas, do you think that the EU is able to become completely carbon neutral by the year 2050?
First of all, I agree with all the speakers as well. Especially, I hope I can call you just Milan, and just don't need to. Okay. I totally agree, and I feel like all these radical changes, it's a matter of political priority. We've seen now with the energy crisis here in Europe that impossible is a matter of political priority. A lot of things can happen if we make it a political priority. So it all comes back down to public support and what our political heads decide. That unfortunately usually also goes beyond like any, like our like decision area, let me say, like decision scope. And from that perspective, yes, to summarize, it's a matter of political priority.
Okay, thank you very much. And we still have a few minutes for the Slido questions. So our audience actually wrote some interesting questions, and I would like to choose maybe the most general one, where maybe all of you would be able to react. And my question is, how do you think we should distribute our resources in the fight against climate change? Are adaptation actions first and mitigation second, or is it vice versa? What are your opinions? And also, of course, you can, all of you can react to this question. Feel free. Yes, Mr. Zvara, feel free to start talking.
I don't know who will start first. I mean, depends where in Europe you are, and depends from which perspective you're looking at. If you're looking from the perspective of reaching carbon neutrality, then yes, it's logical that the mitigation should have the highest priority. Also, following my previous comments, if you are living in some other more sustainable areas, so you should also steering up with the adaptation so you can survive. Because the climate change is irreversible. This is something which everybody can recognize, and depends how much will it affect us. So yeah, if you're looking at like surviving next generation, so your priority of course will be adaptation in a way. But if you are looking from the perspective of reaching some higher goals of climate neutrality and to give the example to the vote, you should look at the mitigation.
And adding up what Milan said, it really depends on which region you're looking at. And we usually talk about climate change consequences, about a thing in the future. Well, we see like last year a couple of more things happening in Europe, if not in Belgium alone. But when we look at especially the global south, there are more. I don't know how it changed now with the numbers from Ukraine, but a couple of months ago at least, there were more climate refugees than political conflict refugees, and that's something that we need to keep in mind. There are a bunch of people being displaced from their homes already, especially in the global south, because of climate change, heat waves, or whatever type of climate extreme weather events are hitting their places. So that's something that we need to keep in mind, and even sometimes I forget, as a person working on these policies, that I always think like, oh, it's something in the future, like we're going to deal with it later, but no, it's already taking place today. So especially in that context, both things, so mitigation and adaptation, are extremely important.
I can only add that I agree with both of my colleagues. If I may say that both is important, of course, if we want to reach the carbon neutrality. So mitigation is really a good starting point where we can start for the future. But what we really need is to act now with more adaptation actions, but it's a question where you live and what problems are you trying to tackle. So is it housing, or is it nutrition, or what is it? So we really need to tackle our problems and make the solutions to do the transition to more sustainable future, but the future like in few years, not few decades, if I can say.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Mr. Stanik also wants to react. Feel free.
Yeah, maybe just very briefly. So, of course, depends on the regional differences, on the potential of the landscape to provide for the how much of the adaptation measures can we take, and then, of course, some regions are more industrial, so there we would have to look more at the mitigation measures. But of course, this might be. I think the pandemics have shown that people are quite good at adaptation as well. So we are also here online, so nobody sees an issue in that. I've been working for home office for 4 years before the pandemic, so I had no problems with adapting to that. And the sad part, I think, is that many companies are requiring people to start coming back to the offices, even if it's not necessary in 90% of cases. So the emissions are going up again from transport, etc. So yeah, we need to simply. This is about the generational change as well. So the people who are now in 20s to the 30s are having completely different views than people who are older. So once this generation is changed also in the politics, hopefully we will be able to implement measures that are even maybe unthinkable today. So I think there is hope. And also I agree with Mr. Zvara on the technologies. I mean, currently we see some breakthroughs in the nuclear fusion. Hopefully it will be implemented quite quickly. But, you know, with fusion, it's like always, it's the technology that is always behind the corner for the last 40 years. So, but I think there is a hope. So, yeah.
Okay.
It's a combination, but yeah, depends on the regional context.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Stanik. Thank you very much, Mr. Zvara, and also Mrs. Malaj and Mrs. Aktas. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope that there will be another opportunity for us to talk about environmental topics, maybe in more detail. Unfortunately, our time has come to an end, and I would like to thank you and thank our audience for watching us. And this is the the end of our environmental section. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Bye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone.
Model conference, as you already can see, these are the perks of being hybrid that we already know. That more than 300 of you have been with us today. Thank you for that. You can also find this video in the files located under our YouTube channel, Modelová konferencia. And again, I would like to thank our Excellency, or Her Excellency, the President of Slovak Republic, Ms. Zuzana Čaputová, for giving us the auspices over this event, also to our speakers and moderators of the discussions, and also to our sponsors, Lidl Slovakia, Guest Cloud, BAT, Philip Morris Slovakia, and for the media coverage also big thanks to Bratislava Deň. And now the biggest thanks goes to you for watching us, for participating in the discussions via Slido, and for being with us and supporting us also in this online environment. Last but not least, I would like to also mention just a quick shout out for our Instagram profile, which is modelovka_ FMV. You can find also, well, little behind the scenes Insta stories and also photos over there, and also to our Facebook group or Facebook page, Modelová konferencia FMV. So again, big thank you and see you next year.